The sound of cannons thundered across the ocean. Sails strained in the wind, and the Union Jack fluttered defiantly against the might of Spain. In the 16th century, when the seas were a battlefield and empires rose and fell on the backs of ships, one man emerged as a legend, part hero, part pirate, part explorer. His name was Sir Francis Drake, a man whose daring voyages carried him to the edge of the known world, whose raids struck fear into the heart of the Spanish Empire, and whose very name became a rallying cry for England's rise as a global naval power. Drake was not born into nobility, nor did he inherit a fleet or a fortune. He was the son of a poor farmer preacher in Devon, raised on hardship, faith, and grit. Yet, through raw courage and relentless ambition, he became the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, a knight of Queen Elizabeth I's, and the scourge of Spain's mighty armadas. To his enemies, he was a pirate, a sea dog, who plundered with ruthless efficiency. To his countrymen, he was a hero, a symbol of England's defiance against a world superpower. This is the story of Sir Francis Drake, the boy from Devon who conquered the oceans, reshaped the destiny of his nation, and carved his name into the annals of history. Francis Drake was born around 1540, though the exact year is uncertain, in Tavistock, Devon. He was the eldest of 12 sons born to Edmund Drake, a farmer and Protestant preacher, and his wife, Mary Milway. His early years were marked by religious turmoil. England, torn between Catholicism and Protestant reform, was a land of unrest. When Catholic uprisings forced the Drake family from their land, they fled to Kent, where young Francis grew up near the Chatham dockyards of the Royal Navy. Living among ships, sailors, and the smell of tar and salt water, Francis became fascinated with the sea. He apprenticed with a merchant mariner who owned a small boat. It was here, sailing up and down the English coast, that he learned the basics of seamanship, navigation, and leadership. The sea would become his school, his battlefield, and ultimately his legacy. By his late teens, Drake joined relatives, the Hawkins family of Plymouth, in voyages to the Caribbean. These expeditions were both commercial ventures and thinly veiled piracy. The English sought to break into the lucrative Spanish-controlled trade of sugar, gold, and slaves. In 1567, Drake sailed with his cousin, Sir John Hawkins, on a notorious slaving voyage to West Africa and the Caribbean. The voyage ended in disaster at San Juan de Ulua in Mexico, where Spanish forces ambushed the English fleet. Ships were lost, sailors killed, and Drake barely escaped with his life. The experience left him with a burning hatred of Spain and a vow to exact revenge. Over the next decade, Drake transformed himself into one of England's fiercest sea dogs, privateers licensed by Queen Elizabeth I to raid Spanish ships and settlements. With speed, daring, and an unshakable nerve, Drake launched raids across the Caribbean, capturing treasure-laden galleons and plundering ports. His most famous early feat came in 1573, when he and a band of men ambushed a Spanish mule train near Nombre de Dios in Panama. Laden with gold and silver, the treasure was too heavy to carry away in full, but the raid cemented Drake's reputation as a brilliant strategist and fearless leader. He was becoming more than a pirate. He was a weapon in England's struggle against Spain. In 1577, Queen Elizabeth I secretly commissioned Drake for a daring mission: sail into the Pacific, raid Spanish holdings, and, if possible, find a route back home around the world. It was a voyage no Englishman had ever attempted. Drake set out with 5 ships, but storms, mutiny, and Spanish defenses whittled his fleet down to just one, the Golden Hind. Yet with this lone vessel, Drake achieved the impossible. He crossed the Strait of Magellan, a treacherous passage at the tip of South America, and entered the Pacific. He plundered Spanish towns along the Chilean and Peruvian coasts, captured the treasure ship Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, known as the Cacafuego, and seized a fortune in silver and jewels. Then, instead of returning the way he came, Drake pressed onward across the Pacific. He charted parts of the Philippines, visited the Spice Islands, and navigated the dangerous waters of the Indian Ocean before rounding the Cape of Good Hope and returning to England in 1580. Drake had circumnavigated the globe, the first Englishman to do so, and only the second person in history after Magellan's expedition. Queen Elizabeth welcomed him as a hero, knighting him aboard the Golden Hind. His wealth, fame, and daring secured him a permanent place in history. The Spanish crown was furious. To them, Drake was no knight. He was a pirate, a thief who had humiliated the world's most powerful empire. King Philip II demanded his execution, but Elizabeth had no intention of sacrificing her champion. In the years that followed, Drake launched ever more audacious raids. In 1585, he attacked Spanish possessions in the Caribbean and burned parts of St. Augustine in Florida. In 1587, he struck at the very heart of Spain's naval power, raiding the port of Cadiz and destroying ships preparing for the Spanish Armada. He called it singeing the King of Spain's beard. These exploits weakened Spain's naval might and bought England precious time. In 1588, King Philip II unleashed the Spanish Armada, a massive fleet intended to invade England and crush Protestant resistance once and for all. Drake, now Vice Admiral of the English Navy under Lord Charles Howard, played a pivotal role in the defense. Using smaller, faster ships, the English harried the Armada in the English Channel. Drake led bold night raids with fireships, scattering the Spanish formation. Finally, storms and relentless English attacks forced the Armada into retreat, suffering catastrophic losses. The defeat of the Armada was one of England's greatest victories, and Drake emerged as a national hero. He was the face of England's triumph against overwhelming odds. Despite his fame, Drake's later years were less glorious. He continued raiding Spanish possessions, but age and overconfidence began to catch up with him. In 1595, alongside John Hawkins, Drake launched an expedition to the Caribbean. The venture went poorly. Hawkins died early on, and Spanish defenses proved stronger than expected. In January 1596, near Puerto Rico, Drake fell ill with dysentery. The great sea dog, who had circled the world and humbled Spain, died quietly at sea. His crew buried him in a lead coffin, committing him to the waters off Panama, the same waters where his legend had been forged. Sir Francis Drake's legacy is one of both triumph and controversy. To England, he was a national hero, a knight of the realm, and the man who helped secure England's future as a naval power. To Spain, he was a pirate and villain who terrorized their empire. He embodied the spirit of the Elizabethan age, daring, ambitious, and unafraid of the unknown. His voyages opened new horizons for English exploration and trade, paving the way for the empire that would follow. Drake's name still echoes in history, not just as a navigator or privateer, but as a man who changed the course of nations. Facts about Sir Francis Drake. Drake was the first Englishman to circumnavigate the globe, completing the feat between 1577 and 1580. His ship, the Golden Hind, is one of the most famous vessels in history. Drake's knighting ceremony was conducted aboard the Golden Hind by Queen Elizabeth herself. He once raided Cadiz, destroying ships meant for the Armada, and called it singeing the King of Spain's beard. Drake was deeply religious and often held prayers aboard his ship. He had a reputation for treating his crew fairly, which made him a popular leader. Spanish sailors nicknamed him El Drake, the Dragon. Legend says Drake played a game of bowls when news arrived of the Armada's approach, finishing the game before heading to battle. He died of dysentery, not in combat, and was buried at sea off the coast of Panama. Today, statues, landmarks, and even a crater on the moon are named in his honor. Sir Francis Drake's life reads like an adventure novel: piracy, treasure, exploration, and battle. Yet behind the legend was a man of flesh and blood, shaped by hardship, faith, and ambition. From a poor boy on the docks of Kent to the most feared privateer of the seas, his journey embodies the power of determination and daring. He lived in an age of giants, Elizabeth I, Philip II, and the Armada, but carved out his own place among them. Drake proved that courage could topple empires, that knowledge of the sea was as powerful as any army, and that even a commoner could change the fate of a nation. Though centuries have passed, Drake's legacy endures in the spirit of exploration and the courage to face the unknown. His life inspires us to chart our own course, to face storms with defiance, and to remember that history's greatest heroes often begin with the humblest of origins.